Next up, as you know, we love Slack for being our platinum sponsor and hosting a coffee session with lead engineers, sharing best practices for launching and leading cross-functional initiatives as an engineer. Speaking today are Izzy Clemenson, senior staff engineer, and Tracy, who we met earlier today, who's the principal engineer at Slack. Welcome, Izzy and Tracy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. Today, Tracy and I are going to start talking about some tips that we've learned along the way of leading cross-functional, sometimes company-wide projects as engineers and not as managers. Tracy and I have both been at Slack for quite a long time. I have been at Slack for over 5 years. And Tracy, I think you're on year 6?
A little over 5 as well.
Yeah. So we're going to tell you really briefly about some of the projects we've led to give you some grounding as to kind of the size of projects that we're talking about, and then dive into our tricks. So Tracy, tell us about Duplo a little bit.
Yeah, so I actually talked about this project a little bit at last year's conference here, and it's a project that was codenamed Duplo and that we launched at Slack to address tech debt in both our iOS and Android code bases. At the time, we had a lot of legacy tech debt, and a lot of legacy architecture, which was really slowing down development. And so we launched this very big project to modernize these code bases. It took 18 months, which it just finished about a month or so ago, and was a really big refactor, which kind of involved all of our mobile engineers at one time or another, not for that entire time, but over that period, pretty much all of our mobile engineers on product and infra were involved in this project.
And this was an engineering-led effort. You brought the need to this effort to our leaders, right?
Yeah, a group of engineers. I don't want to take all the credit, but it was an engineering-led effort. We came up with the proposal. We sort of got pushed for both like that we should have this project done and like exactly what we should do in order to address this problem.
Great. And then I've worked a lot. As Tracy noted, she's been working more on the infrastructure side and a lot of engineering-led efforts. I've spent most of my time at Slack working on the product side of things, working on product and executive-driven efforts that involved a lot of engineering. And so Slack Connect is my most recent example. It was a multi-year project. We were in beta for 2 years. It took another year and a half to get to GA. And the thing about that was, even though the vision came from our CEO, the execution was across all of these engineering teams, fundamentally changing what we meant by core objects in our infrastructure. Like, what is a team? What is a user? What is a channel? And so, although I didn't bring Slack Connect to Stuart brought it to our engineering team. There was a lot of cross-functional engineering efforts that needed to get done in order to get this feature out the door.
Great. So we're going to talk about kind of three different things, kind of the beginning of a project like this, running it, and then kind of finishing it up successfully. And to start with launching a project, a really big cross-functional project that maybe involves a whole bunch of different groups at your company, how do you know that it's actually time to do something that big? How do you know, like, oh, we really need to do something larger than our normal kind of project to address this? And it's really about the size of the issue that you're addressing. I mean, in a lot of cases, like the ones that Izzy and I are both talking about, these were issues that our normal processes we were not able to handle as part of our kind of normal processes or normal feature development. It was something where we really needed a larger effort to address it. And it's kind of about the downside of not doing something like that. Like, we were in kind of an unsustainable path with mobile development at Slack, where it was just so much slower to do mobile development because of the tech debt that we knew we had to do something big to address it. And that kind of ties into the second point of scoping problems like this. You have to scope them large. You're trying to address a really major issue, a major product need, major developer pain. You have to scope something really large to address that, but that can be really scary as well because it's risky, it's big, it's risky. How do you know that how long it's going to take or how many people it's going to involve? So one trick that we used, or technique that we used for Duplo, was to start off, to sort of break it down into milestones and start off with something smaller in order to, start off with the sort of the easy wins or the things that are much more well defined. So we said, okay, in this first milestone, we're going to do the stuff that we know how to do it. We know how many people it's going to take. We know can achieve it. And that sort of give us momentum for the rest of the project, and also give us more time to define the rest of the project and in order to, figure out like some of the unanswered questions that we had about what we were going to do later on. Izzy, do you want to talk a little bit about getting stakeholder buy-in for these big projects?
Yeah. So like I said, the projects I've worked on, the main stakeholder, which would be our CEO, kind of came up with it. But there's a lot of other stakeholders that you need to talk about. Tracy needed essentially to get to a point where we're saying we're going to stop feature development for a good chunk of people on mobile and make this investment. Or in the case of more product focused areas, no one else's roadmap is going to move forward because this product takes priority. And so a lot of the stakeholder buy-in is to make sure that the leadership that you are working with, whether it's PMs, EMs, customer success, whoever it may be, understand why you're doing this, what will the benefits be, and how do we know we're making progress. Success we'll talk about at the very end, but towards the project, we need to know that we're making progress. So that kind of gets into like running the project. And when you're talking about something as large as what we're talking about here, it's not a matter of brute force. You, no matter how dedicated you are, cannot do this alone. It is impossible. There are not enough hours in the day or hands on keyboards to do this alone. So you need to be a part of driving alignment. Does everyone who is participating in this work know why you're doing it? Are you all focused on the end goal and why you're doing it? Once people understand the why and deeply understand it, they are empowered. And empowered is a very important word for me here, to make smaller decisions along the way, so that you don't always have to be checking upon things and you don't feel like you're having to micromanage that project progress. And that helps keep projects on track. You basically pick different people across the organization who are helping drive this project towards the end. You break down smaller projects along the way of, this team over here is going to handle whatever case, and this team over here is going to handle this piece. And what you need to do is at periodic points, bring in representatives of those projects, smaller projects, to make sure you're working together. If someone's getting far ahead and other people are behind, does that mean you need to shift focus, go back to your stakeholders and kind of reassess how you're making progress along the way? And once you break down into smaller projects, that's where the leadership of other ICs is really important. ICs here meaning individual contributors. It is really important, if you are leading a project, to pay attention to the smaller is a terrible word, to pay attention to the leaders who are leading the smaller projects. Because if your project is this big, this is an opportunity for people to be seen, to be heard, to practice their leadership skills, and to get promoted. So when I work across multiple teams, I pay attention to who ends up in these leadership positions. This is a point where you can have a voice in the representation and diversity of the upcoming leaders at your company. Because if you're on the line for the larger project, you can be a representative and invest in representation across the rest of the company or across the rest of your team, as small people are working on smaller projects, and they can use that as their own skills, or to invest in their own skills.
Yeah, and I really think it's important to call out the successes of those leaders, or just of people working on the project in general. That's something I always try and stay aware of, as with these really big projects, is like it's part of my job as a leader to make sure other people are recognized. And so, calling them out in public channels, or just doing, or to their managers, to make sure, again, like that the great work that they're doing is seen. Super important.
And even back to those stakeholders, people who may not interact with some of the more senior executive leadership, if they have made an impact on this project, their name should be heard, and you get to be a part of elevating their work.
Very true. So moving on to like completing a big project like this, this can be, actually pretty complicated. Figuring out how to measure success of a really big project. A lot of times when you get to something that's this big, there isn't kind of, you kind of have to come up with your own metrics for measuring it. A lot of times it's not as simple as like, okay, we know like this is what we're trying to do and then we're done. And, that's not usually the case, especially I think with something like, an infrastructure project where maybe it's a refactor or a migration, sort of, you're not just like shipping a product, you're trying to measure health of the code base maybe, and that can be a tricky thing. And so, when we did Duplo, we tried to come up with a lot of different kind of quantitative measures, like migrating lines of code or removing deprecated, instances, deprecated patterns, adoption of new technologies. We were trying to improve build times, or development speed. So we tracked like local build times and remote build times. So we came up with a whole, kind of suite of quantitative metrics. But we also looked at more qualitative metrics. So, we wanted to talk to developers and say, like, how do you feel about the impact of this project? Is this actually making your development process easier and faster? Maybe talking to, in the case of developing a big product change, talking to customers and getting, customer sentiment, developer sentiment. These can be really important measures. And being able to see how that changes over the course of the project can really give you a sense of its impact. Sort of similar to like, it's hard to measure success. It's also kind of hard to know it when you're done with big projects like this because, again, you're never really completely done. You're not going to completely finish, getting rid of all the tech debt in your code base. You're not going to get to the point where everything is perfectly modernized. There's always going to be more work. There's always more work to do. And so you have to just kind of define a stopping point where you say, hey, maybe we're not completely done addressing this, entirely, but we can maybe transition at this point back from, instead of having this big project umbrella that we're working under, maybe we sort of transition back at that point to addressing, say, tech debt as part of our ongoing product work as part of our normal process. And then just setting, again, a clear goal so that when you've hit that point and you can show that you've delivered the impact that you've said you're going to deliver before you kind of transition out of this project.
And that kind of hard to measure doneness isn't just for infrastructure or code refactor projects. It's also something that I've experienced with product, because a complete product is never done. The project I've been talking about was something that Stuart envisioned at the very beginning of Slack. Clearly, we shipped Slack before this was done, and lots of people use our product, and it met many, many people's needs. And so one thing along the way is to work particularly with product managers and that part of the executive leadership to say, how much of what we've built solves a current customer need that we can ship today? And how much can we build incrementally on top of that? Sometimes the answer is, if we shipped what we have today, it still wouldn't do anyone any good because it's not finished enough. But other times you can find ways to incrementally ship. So you need to have that balance and that conversation with the stakeholders that you have of how can you know when to ship what you have. So I just want to say thank you everyone for coming. I know that not everyone is going to work on a project that is company-wide, but I hope some of these tips will allow you to go into your next leadership opportunity with a little bit more confidence.
Thank you, Izzy and Tracy, for your talk. It's really exceptional. I loved hearing about how to launch a large project as a lead engineer.